painting hung in my church when I was growing up. It was kind of in a forgotten side hallway corner. It wasn't the original. The original was quite valuable. This is, does anyone know this? This is Jesus of St. John of the Cross by Salvador Dali. It's famous for a lot of reasons. It's famous because there's no crown of thorns, there's no blood, there's no nails. But it's also famous because, it's most famous because of this perspective, and it's why I like it. I walked by it in the hallway of my church when I was growing up, and I think, wow. Crucified like that. Up in the air, up above, like, where you put a spotlight. Where a plane with a banner would fly over, where everybody can see. There's, maybe in our world today, if you're in the middle of like the city, and skyscrapers are blocking everything, but straight up, everybody can see that. And so Jesus is crucified in this picture over, up in the clouds, up in the sky, over the world. If you see down here, that divide is a little bit hard to see, the painting is a little dim. But it's the lake, it's the Sea of Galilee with a boat. And Jesus is hanging there. I think the thing that really drew my eye when I was little, though, I didn't really think about the fact that he's over the world. Maybe I did a little bit, but I definitely didn't think about the fact that he's up in the sky. I thought more about the position that he's in, and Dali used an actual human model. He actually tied a guy by his wrists to a scaffolding so that he could see how the human body looked when it was hanging like that. And that's what drew me and what still draws me in. The physicality of that, what it looks like when you're hanging, suspended in that position. It's a torturous position. It's what euphemistically is sometimes called a stress position, and you can see how stressed Jesus is. His arms make a triangle with the cross, and maybe that's significant too. This psalm has this line that the men read, and I stepped out to get my Bible, but I stepped back in time to read this. My life is wasted with grief, and my years with sighing. My strength fails me because of affliction, and my bones are consumed. And that's an Old Testament text about the suffering servant, the one who is suffering. And there's others like it. My mouth is dry. My bones are consumed. My skin is like water. And that's what I think of when I look at this. It's a picture of suffering. Jesus came into Jerusalem to shouts and cheers and hosannas. Jesus came into Jerusalem as the most popular figure in the crowd. Jesus came into Jerusalem. I would imagine that people were pushing to get close. I don't know if you've ever watched a big parade go by, or down in the city. I've several times watched the Marine Corps Marathon because my mother's running it, my wife's running it, and I've never run it, but other people that I know have run it. And especially when you get to the end, to the finish line of the marathon, I could tell you a whole story about what that's like for the marathon runner, and I'm sure that would be very inspirational and spiritual, but I don't know what that's like. But for a spectator, you have to push your way in there, right? If you want to see who is in there, if you want to see the runners going by, you have to push your way in there. And you all know, you've been to a parade, you've been to an event, maybe you've been to Times Square on New Year's Eve, I don't know, but in a big, massive crowd like that, you sort of push and wiggle your way through to the front so that you can see. And so I picture this big, massive sea of humanity, all pushing and striving against each other, waving these branches, throwing them on the ground, so moved that they're ripping their clothes off and throwing their clothes on the ground, just so they can show how much they want to be close to the Messiah who's coming, and they heard this. The Messiah, and they're saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. And David is a legendary figure to them. David is like King Arthur. That's not even a good description for us. David is, I don't want to name any presidents because that gets political, but David is like when the good times were rolling. David is like when we were in charge. David is like when the fairy tale was happening. When everything was ideal and idyllic. David, the Davidic kingdom, is when God's favor was blessing us. And we knew that God's favor was blessing us. It's a long time from them days in Jerusalem. It's a long time from them days for the people who are cheering for Jesus. They're not comfortable. They're oppressed. They're not strong and powerful. They're weak and scattered. They're not a mighty nation. There's only a few of them left. And they're not sure where everybody is. And so the idea that David is coming in, the idea that David has returned, the one who God chose and anointed, is, I can't even describe to you what a relief it is. What a hopeful idea it is. What all of a sudden everyone's hearts leap within them and their legs just leap them right up out of their seats. The blind are seeing and the lame are walking. And David has returned. And they wave their branches and they struggle against each other to get in there just to catch a glimpse of David. Just a little bit later, as they're being paraded past the cross, because that's what would happen. When the Romans crucified someone, especially when they crucified a political opponent, which Jesus is, they brought the people. Now, I'm sure they didn't bring all of Jerusalem, but they certainly brought everybody who came to the trial. Everybody who was shouting when Pilate was asking them, what do you want me to do? They brought everyone out and they paraded them past the cross so that they could see it. So that they could see what was happening. So that they could see this stressed position. So that they could see and know the power of Rome that had hung this man out to die. And when they were being paraded, it says, they went out of their way to lift up their voices again and mock him and spit at him and say, save yourself, you were such a big hero. Why don't you calm down from that? I was just saying to my friend Mike, you can't really blame them. I mean, you can. But they were terrified. They were terrified that the Romans were going to connect them with the people, the same people, because they were the same people who had been cheering when Jesus came into town. They were terrified that the Romans were going to say, oh, and you know what? Just to be extra sure, we're going to crucify everybody who lifted up one of these. If you held this, we're going to check your hands and see if they're stained a little green. We're going to check your cloak and see if it's a little bit dirty, like it was laying on the ground, like a donkey walked over it. We're going to put you up there, too. And they were terrified. They wanted to make sure that everyone knew, that the Romans knew that it hadn't been them. Then indeed, they were the complete opposite of that. They were yelling, no, crucify him! Ha ha ha! You are terrible! Like, why were we even thinking, like, oh, we're not close to him. We're not tearing our clothes off to show how much we want to be connected to him. We're the complete opposite of that. We're utterly rejecting him, utterly despising him, utterly scorning him. Jesus hanging on the cross, the physicality of it. It's only imaginable to us in the way that it probably actually was as a faraway legend of fear. You know, we look at the cross, the cross, the cross, the cross, the cross, all the crosses. We look at the cross and we say, yes, that's, in the cross of Christ I glory. Lift high the cross. This is the cross. This is a symbol that means to everybody, Christian, Jesus, follow. But an actual man hanging on an actual cross, to us, that's a legend of fear. To us, in this day, in this age, that's like a video on the internet of a person being beheaded. The cross, with Jesus hanging on it, wasn't inspiring anybody. It terrified them. And it would terrify you too if you were standing in front of them. It terrified them as it would terrify you, because it showed them exactly what their life was built on. It showed them exactly how the peace was kept. It showed them exactly what they had to give up in order to live in the relative safety that they lived in order to have the relative security that they had. All they had to give up was a man hanging on a cross. And they lifted up their voices and they said, yes, we agree. Do it. Crucify him. We are people who live in the tension between fear, that same kind of fear, and hope. Hope that the future can and will be better, and fear that it can and won't be. Hope that someday the killing will cease, and fear that it never, ever will. Hope that God will come in right into the temple, like it says in the Bible, and will restore the glory of God, the glory of us, the glory of the people of God. And fear that that will never, ever happen. And that if God does come in, he'll take a look around, shake his head, and leave. Like Jesus did. We live in the tension between our hope for the future and our fear of what's coming. The cross of Jesus, to me, invites us to live there. Invites us to look at it and say, this is scary. This is sad. This is shameful. I don't want to look anymore. I didn't put up a bloody one. I put up the dolly one. But the cross of Jesus also invites us to imagine a future that we can't imagine. To imagine a future of restoration. To imagine a future where death is defeated and the forces of death have no power. I don't know if Jesus, I was asked this morning, I don't know if Jesus could imagine that future while he was hanging there. Because you heard what he said. History heard what he said. But the cross invites us to trust in, to believe in, to have faith in that future. Not the one of fear, but the one of hope. This week invites us to stand at the foot of the cross, to wrestle with our own selves, our own doubts, our own fears, our own tendencies, to shout, yes, do it, crucify him. I hope that you will join us this week. And I hope that we will join together to truly proclaim that we are people of the cross, the life-giving cross, upon which hung the Savior of the whole world.